We need to sell the house on Elm Street. My son, Michael, said it as casually as if he were asking for the salt. We were standing in the marble kitchen my entire retirement bonus had paid for. I looked at him, then at my daughter-in-law, Chloe, who was nodding along. That house, I said, calm in a way that felt dangerous, is where your mother died. Exactly, Dad, Chloe chimed in, voice sweet as honey. It's too big. We worry about you. We think you'll be more comfortable someplace smaller. Closer so you can borrow against it more easily? I asked. Silence settled. Chloe dropped the mask. That old house of yours is just a brick tied to our ankles. It's obsolete. Like me, you mean? I said. As I turned away, I heard Michael whisper to his wife. See, told you, we'll have to go to Plan B. I stopped. Plan B? I asked without turning. Their panic was almost tangible. I faced my son and met his eyes. Then by all means, go ahead. But remember this, I've spent a lifetime building things, and I know exactly how to take them down one brick at a time. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking. Like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening? Laughter rolled across the backyard, braided with the sizzle of steaks on the grill. I stepped back a little, leaned against the old oak, and cradled a bourbon. From here, I could take in the whole structure. A handsome house. My son, Michael, had done well on the design clean modern lines, big glass, cedar, paired with slate. But as a retired structural engineer, I wasn't looking at any of that. I was watching the joints, the pitch of the eaves, the way the concrete foundation met the earth. A few small details made me narrow my eyes. The trim looked off by about 1/8 of an inch. No one else would see it. I did. What a gorgeous space, Chloe, a woman in a sundress said. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, turned, her blonde hair catching the late light. Her smile flashed like the quartz countertop in the kitchen one whose final invoice I just paid. Thanks, Susan, she chimed, voice like wind chimes. Here's to our new beginning, built on nothing but Michael's vision and a little faith. Something thumped, quiet and dull, in my chest. A gap in the data. I took a sip of bourbon. The smoke steadied my face. Michael stood in the middle of a knot of young architects, craft beer in hand, holding forth on a retail center. He was bidding, tossing around terms like dynamic integrity and acoustic space optimization. I knew those terms. I also knew he was using them out of context. It was a performance, a glossy coat laid over an unprepped surface. I looked at my son tall, confident in an expensive linen shirt, and saw a building with an impressive facade and suspect inner framing. His laugh came in sudden bursts, too sharp, too loud. It didn't warm the space between us. It sounded like a hammer glancing off a brace, ringing hollow in a bare wall. Across the lawn, I caught the eye of Bill Miller, a contractor I've known for 30 years. He chewed his sausage, eyes narrowed under the sun, and gave me a slow, deliberate nod. Not a greeting, an acknowledgement. He'd seen families like this, built on new money and old debt. We didn't need words. The chatter started to wear me down. I'm out of practice at this. My world now is a quiet of a study, the logic of numbers and old plans. I needed another beer, but I didn't feel like pushing through the crowd. I cut around through the garage, where Michael kept a spare fridge. The garage was improbably spotless, the scent of fresh paint still hanging in the air. The walls were lined with gleaming garden tools I knew had never been used. I found the fridge, but not a bottle opener, probably in the little storage room at the back. I headed that way, my leather soles whispering over the smooth concrete. The storage door was ajar. As I came closer, voices rose, Chloe's sharp and tight. We can't keep doing this, Michael. The credit card bill is due. All of us. I know, Michael said, weary, irritated. I'm trying. Trying isn't enough. If he'd just sell the old house on Elm Street, we could pay off the debt and go to Europe. I'm sick of pretending. I stood still, hand loose on the knob. The house on Elm Street. The one I built with my wife, Mary. Where Michael grew up. Where my memories are held in every grain of wood. Be patient, Chloe, Michael murmured, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Dad's an engineer. He believes in logic. He'll see soon enough that a 70-year-old man living alone in a big place like that isn't practical. Health, maintenance, we just need to speed the process up a bit. Plant a few seeds. Let him arrive at the conclusion himself. I stepped back, slow and quiet. I didn't need a bottle opener anymore. I wasn't thirsty. A cold spread through my chest, a clarity that hurt. Through the small window in the storage door, I watched them, the two of them perfectly framed by the house's absurdly expensive doorway. They looked solid. But engineers know the most dangerous weaknesses are often the ones you can't see, the hairline cracks that spread under too much load. And I had just found a crack running straight through the foundation of everything I thought I'd built. They weren't planning a vacation. They were planning a controlled demolition. And the primary target was me. I left the party soon after, pleading fatigue. No one objected. A tired 70-year-old at a loud party is perfectly reasonable. The lie came easily, slid out as if it had been waiting there. I wondered how many easy lies just like it I'd been hearing from my own family. Back at the house on Elm Street, I didn't turn on the living room lights. I went straight to my study. A small sanctuary of T-squares, roll plans, and the familiar smell of pencil lead. I didn't feel anger. Anger is hot and chaotic. What I felt was cold and exact, like tapping the wall and hearing the hollow note that tells you something's gone wrong behind it. You don't rage at the wall. You begin an inspection. The next morning, I called Frank Gable. Frank handled my firm's books for 30 years before we retired together. He believes in numbers the way some men believe in scripture. Frank, I said casually, Arthur here. I'm looking over a couple investments, helping the kids along. You heard anything about the architecture outfit, Vans and Sterling? Just a preliminary check. There was a beat of silence. Frank knows me. He knows I don't do preliminary. Let me pull a few things, Arthur, he said. I'll get back to you. I sat in the study and stared at the original plans for the Elm Street house. Every line was something Mary and I drew together. I remember 1995 when the petroleum group in Dubai dangled a contract big enough to let me retire 10 years early. Michael had pneumonia then. Mary cried. I turned the contract down. I chose to stay, to build my company here slower, but sound. It was a structural decision. Family is a foundation. You can't put a skyscraper on weak footings. I wondered what I missed, where my math had gone wrong. Frank's email came at 10 p.m. I opened the encrypted file. It wasn't a story, it was a spreadsheet. Red numbers bled across the screen like wounds. Corporate cards maxed. 2 short-term notes coming due. 6 straight months of negative cash flow. I didn't feel anger, not yet. I felt the heavy, quiet disappointment of a project manager staring at a footing that was poured wrong from the start. There was a note at the bottom. Arthur, one more thing. Big cash withdrawals coded as marketing. Ward is the partner, Sterling, isn't actually bringing clients. Also, his wife, Chloe, spends a lot of time at the office. Could be nothing, but, I knew. I didn't sleep. Chloe and Sterling kept flickering through my head. At about 10:30, I grabbed my keys. I needed to see it for myself. I needed data. I drove downtown to the office park. From a block away, I could see lights burning on the 3rd floor at Vans and Sterling. I parked across the street in the shadow of another building. The lot was nearly empty. Michael's BMW, Chloe's Range Rover, Sterling's Porsche, all 3 still there. I reached for the technical binoculars I keep in the car to read high details on job sites, raised them, and dialed the focus. Through the glass, the conference room appeared like a tiny, silent stage. They weren't looking at drawings. Sterling stood behind Chloe, his hands on her shoulders. She tipped her head back and laughed. Then he leaned in. A simple, irrefutable data point. My son's business partner. My son's wife. I've designed bridges to ride out magnitude 8 earthquakes. I've engineered dams that tame a river's force. I never calculated for this kind of load. This failure wasn't cosmetic. It was catastrophic. I lowered the binoculars. The world snapped back, sharp and cold. I glanced at the dash clock. 10:42 p.m. Data point recorded. It wasn't about a few cracks anymore. The foundation was rotten through. And there's only one remedy for an unsafe structure: demolition. I didn't call Michael the next morning. I didn't call Chloe either. Overnight, Anger distilled into something else. Clarity. Purpose. I called George Maxwell. We met at the Athenaeum Club, a fortress of mahogany, leather, and discretion. George has been my lawyer and my friend for 40 years. His mind is like a shop drawing. Nothing extraneous, no detail missed. We took a quiet corner. I didn't vent or plead. I laid out the facts the way an engineer reports a structural failure. The data indicate a scheme to appropriate assets specifically, the house on Elm Street. I began, setting a slim packet on the table. Preliminary financial analysis suggests Vance and Sterling is insolvent. In addition, there's adverse collusion between an interested party, Chloe Vance, and the partner, Robert Sterling. George listened, his sharp eyes giving nothing away. He reviewed the numbers Frank had sent. He looked at the photo I'd taken through the binoculars last night. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "That's awful." He said, "The variables are identified. Now we need an equation." I could confront them, I said. But that's a bad tactic. They'll deny, Chloe will cry, Michael will make empty promises. It'll be messy and ineffective. George nodded. Confrontation only hardens defenses. Litigation is expensive and slow. We need a structural solution, a plan that makes them expose themselves, walk into the trap without realizing it. A thin, cold smile touched his mouth. We need a demolition blueprint, Arthur, one they'll enthusiastically help us build. That's when the plan began to take shape, not from emotion, but from cold logic. Phase 1, fortify, George said, uncapping his fountain pen. We turn you into a fortress. Tomorrow, I'll draft an irrevocable trust for all your assets, the house, investments, everything. You'll serve as trustee, but legally no one can touch them. I'll update your will with explicit terms. And we'll put high-level fraud alerts on every account. He scribbled on the pad. We'll call it the Vance Estate Management Directive. Give it an impressive ring. Good, I said. Defense in place. Now offense. Michael has a weakness, I went on, leaning in. He never reads the shop drawings. He's seduced by the renderings, the big picture, the gloss. He's got my ambition, but not my patience. Then we show him a spectacular rendering, George said, eyes brightening. A faux investment. A ghost project. Project Odyssey, I said, the name arriving on its own. A high-end coastal eco-resort. A legacy project. Big enough, prestigious enough to make him ignore every warning sign. Perfect, George said. You'll be the anchor investor. You'll need an architect you trust. He won't be able to refuse. Greed and desperation won't let him. There's Naaman the Day. Phase 2, the bait, I said, feeling a cold current run down my spine. And Phase 3, the trap, George finished. Once he agrees, we hand him a stack of agreements. Services agreement, NDA, looks standard. Buried in a few hundred pages of legal ballast are a handful of clauses, small but explosive. He sipped his coffee. For example, a provision stating the lead architect is personally liable for all costs incurred if the project is cancelled for any reason, including failure to pass subsequent due diligence. I looked at him. You're a sly old fox, George. He smiled. You pay me to be a fox, Arthur. This has to be irresistible, the answer to every prayer Michael thinks he has. We're not building a house. We're building a beautiful, intricate trap with a defective emergency exit. We sat in silence for a moment. The plan was sketched. Tight, logical, merciless. It gave me no joy. But it did return a familiar feeling control. The feeling of standing over a clear lot, a complete set of plans in hand, knowing exactly what comes next. A week later, I invited Michael to lunch at the Athenaeum Club. I picked a corner table where the light fell just so on the fat roll of drawings I'd staged there. It was a carefully blocked scene, and I was the director. Michael arrived looking a little nervous. Maybe he thought I'd confront him about the party. Instead, I smiled the practiced smile of a proud father. Sit down, son. I've got something to show you. I unrolled the drawings. Inside were lush color renderings of a coastal resort. Low-slung timber buildings folded into the landscape. Boardwalks curling through the dunes. An old architect friend had sketched them for me a small favor. Project Odyssey, I said, ceremonious. I've purchased a parcel in Big Sur, 100 acres looking out over the Pacific. I want to build something that matters. A legacy, not another block of concrete, something sustainable. I met his eyes. And I need an architect I can trust. I watched the reactions move across his face, skepticism, wonder, and then that familiar, dangerous light. Ambition, ungrounded by hard work. Dad, he stammered. Land in Big Sur? I had no idea. I mean, the scale. Feasibility analysis projects an 18% ROI over 5 years. I lied smoothly, deploying the kind of jargon I knew would impress him. Community impact will be significant jobs. Ecotourism. This isn't just a project, it's a statement. He took the bait. Dad, this is the kind of commission you build a life on, he breathed. With this, Vance and Sterling goes national. We could even be in the running for a Pritzker someday. Clears and starting Emerson. I swallow the urge to tell him that legacy is something you build, not something you're handed. I simply nodded. I think so too, but I'm old. I need your younger legs and brain to pull it off. After lunch, when the coffee arrived, I set a thick leather-bound packet on the table. Of course, I added with a tired, rueful air. George insists we do everything by the book. He always does. Michael eyed the packet, wary. Services agreement and an NDA, I explained. Just standard. George based it on the template we've used for 20 years. Mostly to protect our IP before the announcement. I planted the seed. By making it feel familiar, boring, and in his interest. I dulled his caution. Greed and desperation handle the rest. He flipped to the back page, where I tapped it. His pen hovered. Just the usual NDA and services contract, right? He asked, halfway through the first swoop of his signature. Standard, I said, watching the ink soak the paper. He never glanced at Appendix C, Section 4.1, buried on page 78 between a thicket of seismic code references and coastal conservation boilerplate. That clause, in plain English, made the lead architect personally liable for all third-party reimbursements if the project was terminated prior to construction. It felt like watching a man sign his own demolition permit. He slid the signed packet across the table. So, he grinned, the radiance backing his face. When do we start? Immediately, I said. I want the first set of shop drawings in a month. That night, I called George. Phase 1 is complete, I said evenly. He signed. A brief silence. Good, George replied. I've got a list of environmental consultants and surveyors ready to go. The most expensive, naturally. Good, I said. Start engaging them. And bill everything to Vance and Sterling. I hung up and looked out my study window. The moon was full and bright over the garden Mary planted. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt a heavy stillness. The work had begun. The footings were dug. And I knew with an engineer's certainty that the structure I was erecting would collapse precisely on schedule. Project Odyssey officially kicked off, at least on paper. Michael threw himself into it with manic energy. The empty spare room at his place morphed into a chaotic studio of drawings, models, and material samples. He talked nonstop about architectural vision and harmony with nature. He had no idea the real construction was happening elsewhere, in silence. The following week, I met David Chen at a no-name coffee shop out in the suburbs. He didn't look like a private investigator. He looked like a tradesman. Cleused hands, flannel shirt. George had introduced him as the best there is at construction fraud. Your role, I said, sliding a slim file across the table, is a foundation subcontractor named Dave Miller. You're coming in through Jim Carlson at Riverside Concrete. I knew Sterling had done business with Carlson. That was our door. Approach Sterling. Tell him you can supply rebar and ready-mix 15% under market. Say you've got surplus inventory from a canceled job. And record everything. I reply. David nodded, the kind of professionalism that calms a client. He tapped his tie clip. Camera, pens and mic. 2 days later, David called. I'm in. Sterling didn't even blink. Greed is a fantastic lubricant. That night, the first audio file hit my encrypted inbox. I put on the headphones, not as a father, but as a PI's client. Bar noise, glassware clinking. Then, Sterling's voice, oily, self-assured. Dave, here's how we do it. You invoice my company at market. I pay in full. You rebate me, the spread, less your 10%. Everybody's happy. Then another voice one I last heard in wedding vows, Chloe. Michael's too busy with the big picture to notice details like this. He's dreaming about awards, a soft, musical laugh, and the old man believes in his son unconditionally. I didn't flinch. I saved the file. Evidence doesn't have feelings, it's just the truth. I forwarded it to George with one line. File A. A month went by. Michael delivered the first set of detailed drawings. They were good, truly good. His talent is undeniable. Somehow, that hurt more. I called him, Michael, I said, adding a trace of worry to my voice. There's a minor cash flow snag with the Swiss investors, some procedural delay. We may need to pause vendor payments for a month. The silence on his end was pure panic. Pause? Dad, you can't. I've got signed contracts. Sterling's pushing for the advance on materials. I know. I'm sorry. It's temporary, I said. 2 hours later, he was in my study, looking like his world was tipping. Dad, I need $50,000 right now, he said, his tone sliding from accomplished architect to pleading child. Otherwise, Sterling walks. He's got other offers. This is the opportunity of my life, don't you understand? I looked at him, this grown man standing in the room where I once taught him trigonometry, begging for a bailout. He didn't talk about responsibility or mistakes. He talked about optics, about what people would think, and I realized my revenge wasn't about money. It was about forcing him, finally, to look at the real blueprint of who he'd become. I let out a calculated sigh, an act of reluctant concession. All right, I said, I'll loan it to you, but it's my personal savings unrelated to the project. You'll sign a separate promissory note at market interest. George will draft it, just to keep everything clear. Yes, whatever you want, he said, relief flooding his face. The next day he signed without reading. A simple document turned him into my personal debtor, another legal strand in the rope I was looping around him. I handed him more line, and he happily slipped the news. I wired the funds. I knew exactly where they go, part into Sterling's pocket, part to a high-end jewelry boutique Chloe favors. Not a penny into the actual business. My demolition was on schedule, the footings were dug, time to start setting the charges. 2 months after Project Odyssey kicked off, I sat in George's office. On the glossy mahogany between us lay a neat stack of papers, the service agreement Michael had signed, the $50,000 promissory note, statements for the consultants we'd already paid, and a small hard drive holding David Chen's audio files. All structural components are in place, George said, calm as a surgeon running a pre-op checklist. Under clause 4, 1. Michael's personal exposure now totals $287,000 and climbing. We can begin the teardown. I nodded. Proceed. Back in my study, my sanctuary, I opened my laptop. I felt no glee, no anger, only a cold resolve, the certainty of an engineer about to press the button on a controlled blast. It took me under 3 minutes to write the email. The subject line was deliberately dull. Project Odyssey. Phase 1. Review and decision. The body was colder still, assembled from sentences George and I had engineered with care. Michael, after a thorough review of the preliminary environmental assessment, alpha compliance review, and a reanalysis of the market projections, the investors have concluded that the project does not meet long-term viability standards. Accordingly, we regret to inform you that Project Odyssey is terminated, effective immediately. Please see the attached formal letter from our counsel for further details regarding contract wind-down procedures. Sincerely, Arthur Vance. I attached George's PDF, a dense legal document in which Appendix C, Clause 4.1 was discreetly marked. It was the most destructive thing I'd ever built. All I had to do was hit send. I checked the clock. 2:15 p.m. I stood, made a cup of tea, and settled into my leather chair with a book on Roman architecture. I didn't read it. I just stared at photographs of the Colosseum stone meant to outlast everything. At 2:19 p.m., my phone began to jitter across the desk like a panicked insect. Michael, the screen screamed. I let it dance on the polished wood until the call rolled to voicemail. A second call, a third. Then a text blocky capitals and straight punctuation. Dad, what is this? Call me back now. Every unanswered call, every unread message was another brick I calmly set into place atop his collapsing world. Right on cue. 30 minutes later, His BMW fishtailed up my drive, gravel chattering under the tires. The door flew open, and Michael bolted out, leaving it ajar. He pounded on the front door, not knocking, hitting. I walked out, unlocked it, and faced him. Panic and fury mottled his face. "You can't do this," he shouted, waving his phone. "I've signed with contractors, with consultants. I'm going to get sued. They'll destroy me." I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him. "Correct. Under the contract you signed, you're responsible." He froze, as if doused with cold water. "What contract?" "It was a standard services agreement. Appendix C, clause 4.1. I said, each word clean as a cut. "You should read it." George made sure it's quite plain. He stared at me, horror pushing out the anger. He understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. "Why?" he whispered, voice breaking. "We'll discuss the why later," I said. "Right now, the fix. You're on the hook for nearly $300,000, and you can't cover it. Lawsuits will start next week. Your firm will fold. Your house, the one I helped you buy, will be repossessed." I let that sink in. "There's a way through," I went on, in the tone of a negotiator making a final offer. "I'll purchase your obligations from the contractors. I'll make sure no one sues you. On one condition." He looked at me, eyes wild, ready to cling to anything that floated. "You hand me full financial control of Vance and Sterling for 6 months. I'm the only signatory on every check, every invoice, any expense over $100. I'll run a complete audit. You keep designing. I'll run the business." It was the ultimate humiliation, stripping him of command in the kingdom he pretended to build. I watched the war play across his face, pride against fear. Fear won. Fear of a public collapse, of losing everything he faked into existence. "Okay," he said, barely audible. "I agree." "Good," I said. "George will send the papers in the morning. Now go close your car door. You're chewing up my driveway." I turned and shut the door, leaving him on the porch under the shadow of the house he tried to pry from my hands. The blast had gone off. Time to start clearing the rubble. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking. Like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? Monday, 9 a.m. sharp. I walked into the offices of Vance and Sterling. I didn't have to say a word. As I crossed the open floor, small talk died. Keyboards went still. People suddenly discovered spreadsheets they hadn't looked at in weeks. My presence was a structural audit, and everyone sensed a condemnation notice was coming. I didn't go to Michael's office. I asked the receptionist for the large conference room. "And please," I said, "bring every ledger, bank statement, and credit card record from the last 3 years." Frank Gable was already waiting inside, red pen in hand. He'd agreed to help as a consultant. One last favor for an old friend. For 2 days we turned pages. It was a sad story of incompetence and appetite. Aspen trips recorded as business development seminars. Designer handbags billed as office supplies. But the real rot lived in the vendor payments. Frank quickly flagged a string of generic firms, Sterling Design Solutions, Apex Global Imports, all sharing the same P.O. box, all owned by Robert Sterling. Their invoices ran 20 to 30% above market every time. "He's siphoning the company right in front of your son," Frank said. No judgment, just fact. I circled the charges in red. The bank statements looked like a casualty report. On the 3rd day, I called Michael into the room. The glass table was carpeted with flagged documents. "Sit down," I said. He sat, nervous. I slid an invoice across the table. "Help me understand this $20,000 payment for landscape design consulting to Sterling Design Solutions. That project was never executed." Explain. I didn't accuse. I asked. I watched him read, then see the company name. Recognition climbed across his face, slow, painful. He started to mumble something about Sterling handling vendors. I pushed over another sheet. "And this one? $15,000 for materials research from Apex Global Imports?" I called the actual supplier. The materials were worth 10. I let him connect the dots. Let him arrive at the conclusion that his friend and partner, and perhaps his wife, who had backed Sterling at every turn, were cheating him. He left without a word. Minutes later, Raised voices bled from his office, then shouting. I sat and listened as their alliance began to shear under load. The shouting swelled. I heard Chloe shrill, defensive. Don't pin this on me. You're the one managing finances. Maybe if you spent less time dreaming and more time reading the reports, we wouldn't be here. Then Sterling smug, sneering. Oh, come on, Michael. You really think we found this lifestyle designing kitchens? Grow up. That's when I decided it was time to end it. I walked to Michael's office. All three of them stood there, faces flushed, like actors caught in a bad play. I think we should all sit, I said, even. They stared, startled by the interruption. Chloe, I began. You keep insisting you knew nothing about this. Of course I didn't, she snapped, trying to pace her confidence back on. This is between Michael and his partner. I didn't argue. I set a small digital recorder on the glass. The room sealed itself in silence as I pressed play. Michael's too busy with the big picture to notice the details. Chloe's voice purred, cool and conspiratorial. And the old man trusts his son unconditionally. I watched the color drain from her face the way moisture leaches out of bad concrete. Michael stared at his wife, eyes wide with disbelief. Sterling studied the floor, newly fascinated by his shoes. I clicked stop. Any questions? No one answered. The play was over. The curtain had fallen. All that remained on stage was the rubble of their lies. The battle at the office was only the prelude. For someone like Chloe, collapse doesn't happen when the bank balance hits zero, it happens when the social account goes bankrupt. And I knew exactly where to stage the liquidation. Northwood Academy's annual spring gala was the crown jewel on Chloe's calendar. The night wealthy mothers competed in couture and outbid one another for virtue. Chloe was this year's co-chair. It was the summit of the little kingdom she'd built. The week before the event, while she fussed over flowers and menus, I worked on my own arrangements. With George and Frank not to draft contracts, but a different sort of weapon, we produced a 2-page executive summary, clean and professional. Page 1. A simple cash flow chart for Vans and Sterling, showing funds sluicing to Sterling's shell companies. Page 2. Copies of 3 of the most egregiously padded invoices, paired with real quotes from legitimate suppliers. No accusations, no adjectives, just numbers. I printed 10 and slid them into 10 tasteful cream envelopes. I arrived at the gala alone, in an old suit that was perfectly cut. I looked exactly like what I was, a retired engineer adrift in a sea of silk and sequins. Chloe reigned at the center in a red gown, smiling, receiving praise for the wonderful evening she'd pulled together. Michael stood beside her in a rented tux, a shadow with a forced grin. He could sense something hanging over his head, but not when or how it would fall. I didn't go near them. I made a slow circuit, like checking the perimeter of a job site. First target, Tom Holloway, hospital board chair, a man whose name moved things. Tom, I said, shaking his hand, you look sharp. And wait, and I, 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 I. Arthur, thought you'd retired to the golf course. I smiled. I'm trying, but I've been a little uneasy about Michael's firm. I lowered my voice, the concerned father. He's making some aggressive moves. Maybe I'm overreacting, but you understand risk. Would you give this a quick look and tell me if I'm being an old worrywart? I handed him an envelope. Just a few figures. He took it, curious. I moved on. Next, Sarah Jennings, top attorney, PTA president. Same play, different pattern. Then a major developer. Then an investment banker. I planted my seeds quietly, methodically. Then I stepped back, found a chair in the corner, and watched. Nothing at first. Then Tom, after reading, leaned to whisper in a friend's ear. Sarah frowned, pulled out her phone, and started tapping. You could feel the room temperature drop a degree at a time. A murmur began to spread like a hairline crack in glass. Invisible at first, then skittering across the pane. Conversation stuttered and died when Chloe approached. People suddenly needed a drink, or to locate their spouse. Smiles aimed at her froze on delivery. At first she didn't notice, still gliding her red dress. Then she felt it. The chill, the glances. Confusion crept in, then worry. It wasn't a public flogging. It was a quiet, collective excommunication. The coup de grace came from Sarah Jennings. She walked up to Chloe and Michael, face like ice. I was too far to hear, but I could read the lips. I think it's best if you both head home. Chloe's eyes went wide. She started to protest. Sarah gave a small, immovable shake of the head. Being ushered out of your own event, in front of hundreds of people pretending not to look, is a social death sentence. Michael, white as plaster, took her elbow and steered her toward the exit. As they passed me, Chloe met my eyes. The smugness was gone. What remained was raw hatred and an unspoken question. Was it you? I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I lifted my bourbon a fraction, barely a gesture. An acknowledgement they were gone. The band played on, but the air had changed. The performance was over. The queen of the ball had been decrowned. Her kingdom was built on reputation. I merely handed them the truth. I knew he'd come. After the gala, Michael and Chloe's world collapsed in public view. Clients backed out. The bank started calling. Chloe, I heard, moved back in with her parents. 3 days of silence. On the 4th, Michael's BMW pulled into my drive. I was in my study, waiting. By my elbow sat a small oak box, scuffed with time. I hadn't opened it in 15 years. Michael came in without knocking. The fury from last time was gone. So was the borrowed confidence of the past few years. He looked empty, like an abandoned building. Windows blown out, wind whistling down hollow corridors. He stood in the middle of the room, hands hanging at his sides. Why? He asked, voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Why did you do all of this? I didn't invite him to sit. I met my son's eyes. Why? I echoed flat. Because you built your life on a faulty foundation, Michael. You chose charm over character, shortcuts over structural integrity. I stood and went to the window. A building doesn't fall because of a single storm. It falls because of hairline cracks, cheap rebar, concrete watered down, where no one can see it until it's too late. This wasn't a storm that wrecked your house. This was the scheduled demolition of an unsafe structure. I merely signed the permit. You destroyed me, he said. A spark of life, a flicker of anger returning to his voice. You destroyed my family, my company. For what? An old house? Your pride? For the truth? I said, turning back to him. The truth? The truth is Chloe made mistakes. Sterling took advantage of me. But at least he believed in me. He was my partner. He shouted that last line, a final, desperate act of loyalty to the wrong man. I didn't argue. I walked back to the desk, set my hand on the oak box, and turned a tiny key I've carried in my wallet for years. I took out a thin, time-yellowed file and slid it across the gleaming wood toward him. Your mother died 15 years ago, I said evenly. The police report called it an accident. Lost control on a wet highway. Michael stared at me, thrown by the sudden shift. I never believed it, I went on. Your mother was a careful driver. That car, the old Mercedes Roadster she loved, she'd owned it 3 weeks. Bought it from a used car man we knew. Your friend, Robert Sterling. He froze. I hired a private investigator. It took 2 years. We found the mechanic who inspected that car before Sterling sold it. He said the brakes had a serious defect. He warned Sterling, but Sterling needed a commission. He lied to your mother, told her the car was perfect. I tapped the file. In there is a mechanic's sworn statement and another report from a witness. A trucker who saw a black sports car cut your mother off moments before the crash. Read the vehicle description. See, Michael's hands trembled as he lifted the page. He read. Then he looked up, his face a mask cracking open into horror. His eyes went distant. It was Sterling's car, he whispered, sleepwalker soft. Yes, I said. I didn't have enough to take to court. Your mother signed the paperwork. The witness statement wasn't precise enough. But I know the truth. He killed your mother by proxy for a few $1,000s, and then he drove away. And you built your future with him. I let the silence settle heavy, terrible, more damning than any accusation. I tried to warn you about Sterling for years. I said at last, weariness in my voice. Hints, questions. You wouldn't hear them. You chose him over me, facade over footing. All I could do was wait until you were ready to see who he really was. He looked at me, eyes wet now, the anger, the smugness gone. What remained was ruin. He hadn't just lost a firm, a wife, a reputation. He lost the story of his life. He lowered himself into the chair opposite me, head in his hands, and began to cry, not the loud sobs of a child, but the soundless, rending grief of a man who has just discovered the structure he built wasn't merely flawed. It was founded on the crime. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you, and where are you listening? 6 months later, autumn had come. The leaves on the oak in my yard were turning a tired yellow. Life had settled into a quieter rhythm. Vance and Sterling was gone, liquidated to pay his debts. Sterling had vanished word was he'd moved to Florida. Chloe and Michael finalized their divorce, swift and bitter. I sold the house on Elm Street. A young family bought it, and I watched their kids play on the same patch of grass where Michael once did. I didn't feel sad. That house belonged to a story that had ended. Michael lived now in a small walk-up downtown, over a laundromat. He was working for a modest architecture shop, the kind that does kitchens and baths. No more glossy projects, no glittering parties, just work. Today, I decided to visit. I didn't call ahead. I found him in the apartment, bent over a drawing. The room was bare, a drafting table, a tired sofa, a few unopened boxes. He looked thinner, older. The smug edges had drained from his face, replaced by quiet fatigue. He looked up when I came in, a little surprised, but not afraid. I hadn't brought money. I hadn't brought advice. I set an old roll of drawings on his only table. Found this while clearing out the workshop, I said. He unrolled it slowly. Inside was a set of plans he'd never seen. 20 units of affordable housing, simple, useful, intelligently drawn. In the corner, the title block read, Mary's Meadow. It's the project your mother and I always wanted to build before she died, I said. Decent homes for low-income families. Something that actually helps. I watched him. I set up a nonprofit with the proceeds from the house. I've got the capital. I need an architect. No fat contracts. No glowing press. No profits. Just work. He stared at the plans, fingertips tracing the clean, efficient lines. This wasn't a showpiece. This was real work pouring foundation for someone else. Raising walls that shelter instead of facades that impress. He was quiet a long time. Then he looked up, eyes clear for the first time in years, and nodded. Once, as I was leaving, he called after me from the door. Dad, he said, hesitant, do you ever forgive me? I stopped and turned to face my son. I saw the man he might become, not the man he'd been. Forgiveness isn't a set of drawings, Michael, I said, my voice softer now, tired but clear. It's not something I can hand you. It's the daily work of laying one honest brick on top of another. When you've built something that stands on its own, you won't need my forgiveness. You'll have your own. I left him with the plans and the quiet. Driving home, I passed the empty track where the Odyssey was meant to be. It's nothing now but open ground with weeds coming up. I didn't feel victorious. Demolition is never a victory. It's a necessity. I looked ahead through the windshield toward the skyline I helped raise. There are always new projects, new footings to pour. Some structures have to be taken down to bedrock before you can build anything true. I have finished the teardown. Now the rebuilding, quiet, difficult, could begin.